Welcome back, Defenders. Currently, we're still on year 2 of Russia's disastrous invasion of Ukraine, and check it out. We're about to go over 150,000 soldiers killed fighting for Russia in Ukraine. The current number is 149,890, only 110 to go, and I'm pretty confident that Ukraine can hit that before breaking for lunch tomorrow. And this war in Ukraine has been a nightmare for Russian men of military age, because more of Russia's soldiers have died in Ukraine, a war Putin thought would be over in days, than in all wars since World War II combined, according to this new analysis. This analysis is from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and here are their numbers. So this is Russian forces killed in select wars since World War II. So we've got Korea and their limited involvement, only 120 casualties, Hungary, Egypt, Yemen, Algeria, Vietnam, Mozambique, Czechoslovakia, the Sino-Soviet border conflicts, Angola, Ethiopia. So to credit the Russians or the Soviets, they didn't really engage in or initiate a large-scale war until the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. They stayed there for a decade and suffered between 14 and 16,000 deaths. We then had the First and Second Chechen Wars. Once again, casualties are estimated in the tens of thousands. We have the invasion of Georgia in 2008, and then the invasion of Crimea and the Russian military's participation in the Donbass region the last 8 years. But add up all these numbers, and there's no other way to look at it. More Russian soldiers in the last year have been killed fighting in Ukraine than all wars that Russia has participated in since World War II. Astonishing number. Now you'll notice here, this organization is estimating 60 to 70,000. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians basically have double that. And the reason why is because Ukraine is counting anyone fighting for Russia. So the DPR and LPR fighters, they're technically Ukrainian citizens, but Russia is recruiting them or forcing them to fight on their side. Same goes maybe for Chechens as well as the Wagner mercenaries. Perhaps this analysis done by the Center for Strategic International Studies is not counting Wagner mercenaries. They're not regular Russian forces. And the loss of life in the Russian military is not distributed equally amongst their empire. Here is a per capita casualty rate for the various Russian regions. So each one of these squares is 100,000 people. And then it's showing you the deaths per 100,000 people. And if it's blue, then the people there are basically being protected by the government. They're not being conscripted. They're not being mobilized and sent to Ukraine. And if it's red and black, these are the people being heavily targeted for recruitment and then sent to the front lines to be used as cannon fodder. So if you're from the Far East or rural provinces, if you look more Asian, Moscow is going to recruit those men first and send them to Ukraine. But if you are the preferred ethnicity living in Moscow, Putin and his government, his regime, is doing everything to protect these people in order to protect his base of power for the empire. So this war is going terrible for Russia, and you wouldn't realize this listening to certain members of the U.S. House of Representatives. Let me share this clip with you of Representative Matt Gaetz talking to officials from the Department of Defense.
Is the Azov battalion getting access to U.S. weapons?
Not that I'm aware of, but if you have information,
I seek NAM's consent to enter into the record the Global Times investigative report that that talks about training. It's from the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensics Research Lab, citing the Azov Battalion was even getting stuff as far back as 2018.
Without objection, so ordered.
Any reason to disagree with that assessment, Dr.
Is this the, I'm sorry, is this the Global Times from China?
No, this is...
That's what you read.
Yeah, it might be. Yeah, would that be a reason?
As a general matter, I don't take Beijing's propaganda.
Well, no, yeah, just tell me if the allegation is true or false. I mean,
I don't have any evidence one way or the other. As a general matter, I don't take Beijing's propaganda at face value.
Fair enough. I would agree with that assessment. April 20.
So this Chinese sock puppet is regurgitating Beijing propaganda in a congressional hearing, asking that it be submitted as evidence in the record. And this DoD official just looks at him in bewilderment, saying, "Are you really citing Chinese propaganda to discredit Ukraine?" That is what Matt Gaetz is trying to do. I love the reaction of this one guy in the background. And for my non-American viewers, let me explain briefly what's happening here in the U.S. House of Representatives. The vast majority of Republican voters support Ukraine. The vast majority of House Republicans support Ukraine. There's currently 222 House Republicans. If given a chance to vote, I think 150 or 160 of them would vote to continue supplying aid and equipment to Ukraine for their defense. But there's a small minority, about 50 House Republicans, that love Russia or hate Ukraine. And the leader of this caucus is, I call her Marjorie Trader Green. Here's a video that she put out yesterday.
I'm completely against the war in Ukraine. I want to see it come to an end. I want Russia and Ukraine to come to peace talks and end this war. But you know who's driving it? It's America. America needs to stop pushing the war in Ukraine.
So this is a member of the House of Representatives saying that it's America's fault. America is the one pushing this war in Ukraine, not Vladimir Putin, not Russia, the country who attacked their neighbor. It's America's fault, according to Marjorie Trader Green. And on her Twitter accounts, she tweets Russian disinformation, trying to attack and discredit Ukraine. And here's what she said last week. Biden's war in Ukraine is a gift on a beautiful platter to China, the same China whose propaganda that Matt Gaetz likes to cite and source during congressional hearings. But the opposite of this is true. China is watching the conflict in Ukraine. And if America does not stand up for democratic nations, for other countries to defend their sovereign territory, then China will view that as weakness from the United States. That China can attack their neighbors, they can attack Taiwan, they can expand their military power, and use nuclear weapons as a threat to be allowed to do it. Marjorie Trader Green is completely wrong. China is watching, and it's important that democratic nations around the world continue to support Ukraine. And I want to talk about this bizarre echo effect in American politics where the extreme right and the extreme left often have the same position for different reasons. So here is Code Pink protesting in Congress saying no F-16s to Ukraine. I didn't know Code Pink still existed. They got most of their notoriety a decade ago, interrupting congressional hearings about the war in Iraq. But here is Code Pink last week. This is their Twitter page. They've got 105,000 followers. And they managed to harass President Biden at a restaurant in Washington, D.C.
President Biden, I hate to bother you. We need to end this war in Ukraine. We need to push for negotiations. I hate to bother you, but people are dying. And we need to end and lift the blockade in Cuba. Please, Cuba, stop the terror. Please. He's just trying to have dinner. I hate to bother you. I will happily leave, but I hope that we push for peace talks and negotiations and take.
So there you have it. Marjorie Taylor Greene and Code Pink have the exact same talking points, that America is the one pushing this war, and they need to go to peace talks or negotiations in order to end this war. I would love to see Marjorie Taylor Greene and Code Pink hold a joint anti-war rally. Honestly, if they did that, I would send a campaign donation to Marjorie. I would love to see that. But it's incredible that lunatics on the far left and the far right have the exact same talking points on this issue. But this is impossible. There can be no negotiations. There can be no peace talks. Here's an article from Fox News. Children's torture chamber reported in Ukraine. And I've seen the pictures, I've seen the videos after the city of Kherson was liberated. They found torture chambers for children. I watched the video of a 14-year-old girl giving an interview who had been held and tortured by the Russians. So do you really think you can sit down at a peace talks with a country that trains their intelligence officers to torture children, 14-year-old girls? So no, I don't think peace talks and negotiations are possible. Code Pink and Marjorie Taylor Greene are idiots, or they're willfully pushing Russian propaganda, Russian disinformation. And to prove my point even further, here's a clip on Russian state TV from yesterday where the host, Olga, is trying to placate or soothe her own audience, saying all this talk coming from people like Marjorie Taylor Greene about peace talks and negotiations, don't worry about it. Russia is never going to participate. Russia is never going to engage in good faith with any kind of negotiations or peace talks.
Это, во-первых, война за существование России. Никто не планирует сдаваться. Про сдачу вообще разговор не шел никогда. Отступать или, упаси нас Господь, отказываться от цели спецоперации нет. Мы идем до конца. Но и для всех наших телезрителей важное обстоятельство, для тех, кто вздрагивает всякий раз, когда слышат про призывы с нашей стороны к мирным переговорам. Мы добиваемся мирных переговоров, опять-таки, упаси нас Господь, не потому, что планируем отказаться от целей и задач. Как сказали для тех, кто тревожится, в Министерстве иностранных дел, и сегодня повторил Песков, мы добьемся выполнения целей и задач. Если хотите, за столом переговоров. Можем мирным путем об этом договориться. Все, что написано в Конституции нашей страны, там уже написано. Хотите, соглашайтесь на это миром. Не хотите, будем оружием принуждать вас к исполнению наших.
So there you go. There are the Russians saying that they will never in good faith engage in negotiations. If Ukraine wants to peacefully give Russia everything they want, well, they're allowed to do that, but that's not a negotiation. So she's saying as long as Russia has the capability to attack and use force, they're going to continue until they gain 100% permanent control of these 4 oblasts. And mind you, they're still claiming that Kherson is a Russian city when they lost the city. They're still claiming that Zaporizhia is a Russian city when they've never controlled the city of Zaporizhia, a city of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian citizens. There is no peace talks. There is no negotiations. The other argument that Kremlin stooges in Congress will make is the issue of tax dollars and fraud. But there's no evidence of fraud in weapons to Ukraine, according to watchdogs. The Pentagon's Inspector General said Tuesday his office has found no evidence yet that any of the billions in dollars in weapons and aid to Ukraine has been lost to corruption or diverted into the wrong hands. But that doesn't matter if independent inspectors and watchdogs are telling these members of Congress all the money is being used to fight Russia. They're going to continue this narrative, this disinformation campaign that Ukraine is corrupt and all the money is being stolen. But the results speak for themselves. As an American taxpayer, I can't imagine a higher return on my money than giving it to Ukraine to completely decimate the Russian military. So here's a post from the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine reporting that a single Ukrainian soldier operating Javelin missiles destroyed 5 Russian tanks in a single day. I can't play the video because I can't show violence and destruction, but I'll put this video in a pinned comment down below. And a single Ukrainian soldier in one day destroyed 5 Russian tanks. That's a pretty good return on our tax dollars going towards global peace and security. So this war is not going to end with peace talks or negotiations with the Russians. So there's only 2 possible ways for this war to end now. The first way is a complete military defeat for the Russians. The Ukrainian military is going to have to expel all Russian forces from their sovereign territory. It's then at that point that negotiations can start for an armistice or a ceasefire. The second way, which would be a lot easier and faster, is somebody just takes out Putin. Vladimir Putin will be killed by his own inner circle, President Zelensky predicts. This would be nice, but I don't think we can count on this. Putin has done a really good job the last 8 years of eliminating anyone that might oppose his plan of rebuilding the Russian Empire. And Russia continues to advance on the front lines because Russia does not count people. Zelensky says that the fighting in Bakhmut is brutal because Russia doesn't care how many soldiers die advancing on Ukrainian positions. And when we switch over to the military map, I don't like the way this is looking. The city of Bakhmut is almost completely surrounded. And for weeks now, we've been saying that the only road into the city where supplies and reinforcements could come in is this road from Chasiv Yar. The Russians know this, and for weeks they've been pushing as hard as they can to cut off this road. They want to isolate and cut off the remaining Ukrainian defenders in this town. Perhaps this road here is still safe and they can still get men and material in and out, but to me, it makes perfect sense if they just fall back. I argue that time is on Ukraine's side. They can always retake this city later, similar to how they retook Izium, they retook Liman. Falling back in the short term is better if it saves lives. But I'm suspicious that the Ukrainian forces in the city are the ones arguing against a retreat. They've been defending this town for a year now, and they don't want to give it up. Here's a clip of a Ukrainian defender in the city from yesterday.
8 лютого, місто Бахмут, місто горить, ворог давить, все буде Україна, а Путін гандон.
What the Ukrainians have accomplished this last year is incredible, and to put it in perspective, it's important when looking at these maps to remember the scale. So this magenta part is what the Russians controlled prior to the invasion. They controlled this a year ago. So when we break out the ruler and we just measure along this road, how far have the Russians gotten in a year? And the Russians have gone about 29 kilometers. So in a year, they've gone 29 kilometers and lost over 100,000 soldiers. I can walk 29 kilometers in a day probably. So the losses, the casualties, the damage to their reputation and economy, I don't argue this is worth it. None of this is worth it for the Russians. But Ukraine is not remaining idle. They're working on things behind the scenes. A spring counteroffensive is coming. That is what they're focused on. That is what they're preparing for. They're also ramping up, production of their own domestic drone fleet. Ukrainian drone gets within 70 miles of Moscow. So Western allies have been supplying drones to Ukraine, but they've been telling them only use these in occupied territories. But there is no rule about Ukraine just producing their own domestically made drones and then using those to hit military targets inside of Russia. So Russia did shoot down this drone. It didn't make its targets, but if Ukraine can acquire the resources to start mass producing their own equivalent to the Shahed Iranian drones, then I do think that military targets deeper into Russia will start lighting up. Additionally, here's a fantastic video. This was put out by Canada's military showing Canadian instructors in Western Poland training Ukrainians on the Leopard 2 tank. So this is a simulator ride, basically, to simulate the operations of the Leopard 2 tank. Canada has announced donating 8 Leopard 2 tanks, as well as you can see, they're offering training to the Ukrainians. So this offensive capability is coming over the coming weeks and months. Here's a picture put out by the UK's United Kingdom's Ministry of Defense of Ukrainian defenders training on the Challenger 2 tanks. Once the soldiers are trained and the tanks are transferred, these will appear on the battlefield coming soon. Also, more good news as far as training. It's being reported that I think it was about 200 Ukrainian defenders that went to Oklahoma here in the United States. They're about to graduate from their training on the Patriot air defense system, and then they can start getting this set up and under their full operations within the coming weeks. So let's talk about the domestic situation in Russia, and here's an interesting story. Floral tributes to slain opposition leader Nemtsov reported across Russia. And I vaguely remember when this guy was assassinated in Russia, but if you don't remember him, the Moscow custom of leaving floral tributes to honor the memory of murdered Kremlin critic Boris Nemtsov on February 27th each year appears to have spread throughout Russia. So this was an opposition leader critical of Putin after Putin invaded Crimea. And more than likely, Putin just had him killed. He was assassinated on this bridge just outside the Kremlin. But I've never heard this guy speak before. And now that this is the 9-year anniversary of his death, check out this video of what he was saying in Russia 9 years ago.
Что получит этот Путин в итоге, скажите мне? Что он получит? Он получит врага в лице Украины. Всю дорогу меня спрашивают, а зачем ты пришел на этот марш? Марш мира и свободы. Зачем? Я говорю, потому что я патриот страны. Потому что я против войны. Я не хочу, чтобы сюда приходили к нам в Москву, в Ярославль, в Нижний Новгород, груз-200. Чтобы наши матери, наши жены и дети плакали. Я не хочу этого. Я считаю, что мы не имеем права в отношении дружеской страны так себя вести. Это подлость, это наглость. А главное, это во вред России. Я долго думал, какие есть аргументы у Путина для того, чтобы так себя вести. Хоть какие-нибудь. Самый простой ответ такой. Он больной человек.
Wow. I want to say that Russia used to have freedom of speech, but Putin had this guy assassinated. If you could arrest and torture a ghost, I'm sure Putin would do that. It is pretty sad knowing how many good people in Russia have either been arrested or killed by Putin over the last decade. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Russians have chosen to flee the country rather than contribute to Russia's atrocities. So why is Putin doing this? And it's really just about money and power. Is Vladimir Putin the richest person in the world? This financier says he's worth more than Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos combined. So I think the salary for the Russian president is $140,000 a year. But it's estimated that Putin is the richest man in the world, having been stealing the wealth of Russia for over 20 years now. So what does being the richest man in the world get you? And at a minimum, it gets you a mistress younger than your biological daughters. So Alina Kyiva, it's well reported, this is Putin's mistress. She's a former Olympic gymnast and has already given birth to several of Putin's children in Switzerland. And it's being reported that Putin bought his girlfriend the most expensive apartment in all of Russia. So if you're the mistress to the richest man in the world, this is where you get to live. You be the judge whether or not this is good home decor for that much money. Final couple clips I have for you. The first one, I think, is a Russian bank ATM in Germany, and it looks like the employees at the bank decided to have a little fun.
So, Geld abheben. Wir wählen die Sprache in der Ukraine. Wir wählen die Sprache Russisch. Und es kommt und das Geld abheben ist nicht mehr möglich.
So at this bank ATM, when you select the Russian language, the only thing it says is glory to Ukraine. And then to get your ATM card back, if you want that, you have to hit the button glory to the heroes. So somebody working at this bank decided to have a little fun with their Russian customers. Final clip I have for you is of a Ukrainian defender who was released. He was a prisoner of war. This clip I think is from a couple weeks ago. I do remember sharing the clip of this man. He ate his first piece of fruit in like 10 months. But this is the moment where he was able to get on a cell phone and call his wife to let her know that he was safe.
Рідні навіть не знають, чи живі.
Так, скоріше все.
Жах. Хочете подзвонити?
Так.
Пам'ятаєте номер?
Отлично. Алло, Юлечка, привет, это Макс, я твой муж.
Тебя поменяли?
Да, меня поменяли, я только что уехал в Украину. Привет, как ты? Ты в Киеве?
Я в Киеве, родители слышно, ваша бумажка.
Твои живы, все в порядке? О, Господи, как я счастлив.
That's all for this update video. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. If you found this video informative, give me a thumbs up. Best way to support the channel. Comments and questions, let me know down below. I love hearing from you guys. Till the next video, keep defending the truth, keep defending democracy.